6:40 p.m. We're about 10 minutes past the promised time, but I think we'll get started. I want to get moving on the agenda here on the item many have come far and wide to talk about, at least not as far as Sacramento this time, for item number 6. And Ms. Sobek, could you please introduce this item?
This is an action item for the board, and we have a short staff presentation, and then we will let who's going to do the introductions. Matt McCarthy is going to do the introductions for the board for the staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Moore, members of the board. My name is Matt McCarthy, and I work in the State Water Board's Water Rights Permitting Program. With me today is Lily Weaver, Staff Counsel for the State Water Board, Amanda Montgomery, Program Manager for the Water Rights Permitting Section, and Bruce Wilcox, Assistant Secretary for Salton Sea Policy for the California Natural Resources Agency. Agenda item number 6 for today's meeting is the board's consideration of an order proposed by board staff. The proposed order would accept a stipulation prepared by the Imperial Irrigation District, or IID, and other parties, and revise Board Order WRO 2002-0013 by incorporating certain conditions of the stipulation into the order. This staff presentation will cover 6 general topics: background information on the Salton Sea, Colorado River water rights, and IID's water rights, Board Order WRO 2002-0013, significant legislation and restoration efforts relating to the Salton Sea, a petition submitted by IID in 2014 and the significant actions that followed, a motion submitted by IID earlier this year that resulted in the development of a stipulated order for consideration by the board, and finally, Lily Weaver will provide a brief overview of the proposed order before you today that would revise Board Order WRO 2002-0013. The Salton Sea is California's largest lake. Over the last few thousand years, intermittent fresh and saline lakes have repeatedly formed in the basin, either as a result of flood flows or as a result of the Colorado River changing course. The sea, as we know it today, was formed in 1905 when floodwaters of the lower Colorado River broke through a levee and were diverted into an irrigation canal leading into the Imperial Valley. The sea provides a recreation area that attracts visitors annually and supports the local economy, and it is a critical stop on the Pacific Flyway for migratory birds, including several threatened and endangered species. Although the sea receives some natural flow, approximately 90% of the inflow to the sea is agricultural drain water from the Imperial Valley via an extensive drainage system constructed by IID in 1923. Since it has no outlet, salts concentrate and nutrients enhance eutrophic conditions, resulting in a salinity of the sea being approximately 50% higher than the ocean. The salinity in the sea is increasing, and catastrophic die-offs of birds and fish have raised serious concerns about the long-term viability of the current ecology of the sea. Without a salinity control project and other measures, the salinity in the sea will continue to increase until salinity levels are too high to support a fishery and fish-eating birds. Understanding the Salton Sea requires awareness of the legal framework that guides California's use of Colorado River water rights. California's use of Colorado River water is subject to the law of the river. The law of the river is a collection of legal decisions that provides, among other things, that California's allocation of Colorado River water is limited to 4.4 million acre-feet per year. Historically, California used more than its allocation because surplus water was available. As other basin states increased their use, there was a need for California to reduce its use. To address this need, California developed the Colorado River Water Use Plan in May of 2000. The plan sets forth California's framework to use water within its allocation and includes the voluntary transfer of water from agricultural to municipal uses. IID has a water right permit to divert up to 10,000 cubic feet per second from the Colorado River on an annual basis for irrigation and domestic use on nearly 1 million acres of land. The permit also limits IID's total annual diversion under all its water rights and its federal contract to 3.85 million acre feet. The limit reflects that it is a collective right with other agricultural water users and is consistent with the 7-party agreement of 1931. This agreement established a priority system for water users within California of Colorado River water. In 1998, IID and the San Diego County Water Authority submitted a petition to the State Water Board seeking approval of a transfer of water from agricultural to municipal uses. As a result of negotiations with other parties, the petition was modified to include other recipients of the transfer of water. In October 2002, the State Water Board approved the requested transfer of water with issuance of Order WRO 2002-13. The 2002 order was revised in December 2002 when Order WRO 2002-16 was issued that both denied reconsideration and added clarification. The initial term of the transfer was for 45 years with an optional 30-year renewal period for a total of 75 years. The order authorized the transfer of 200,000 acre-feet of water per year to the San Diego County Water Authority and 100,000 acre-feet per year combined to both the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and the Coachella Valley Water District. The 2002 order was a key component of the Quantification settlement agreement, which will be discussed later in this presentation, that was under negotiation when the transfer was approved. In issuing the order, the State Water Board considered potential environmental impacts and socioeconomic impacts. As the State Water Board considered the IID transfer request, it had to consider a number of issues. The proposed transfer presented the potential of air pollution in the form of windblown dust emissions from exposed Salton Sea shoreline. The proposed transfer could also result in lower water levels and increased salinity and selenium concentrations in the sea, causing harm to fish and protected bird species. Socioeconomic impacts could also occur as a result of land fallowing and making water available for the transfer. And the proposal raised the possibility of a reduction in recreational and aesthetic values in and around the sea. In approving the transfer, the State Water Board found that the benefits of the transfer outweighed the potential impacts to water quality, agricultural resources, and air quality. However, the board required, among other things, that IID implement the Salton Sea Habitat Conservation Plan, which called for maintaining salinity levels at the Salton Sea that would have existed absent the transfer for a period of 15 years. That 15 years concludes less than 2 months from now at the end of 2017. The purpose of this approach was to mitigate impacts long enough to allow the state to complete an examination of the feasibility of long-term restoration and to develop a restoration plan for the sea. The board also required IID to mitigate air quality impacts for the life of the transfer to the extent feasible. The Quantification Settlement Agreement, or QSA, is important to consider when discussing water right issues relative to the Salton Sea. The QSA describes a collection of agreements intended to settle long-standing disputes within California regarding the priority, use, and transfer of Colorado River water. It was entered into by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, California water agencies, the federal government, and Indian tribes in October of 2003. The QSA facilitates California's efforts to reduce the use of Colorado River water in accordance with the Colorado River Water Use Plan. The QSA also established water budgets for the parties and enabled them to pursue the petition for the long-term transfer of conserved water from agricultural to municipal uses. Following the issuance of the 2002 order, various legislation has been passed in support of Salton Sea restoration. 3 Senate bills were enacted in 2003, one of which established the legislature's intent that the state should undertake restoration of the sea. In addition, the Resources Agency was required to conduct a study to determine a preferred restoration alternative in accordance with the legislative mandate. The legislation also authorized the Department of Fish and Wildlife to assume the cost of QSA-related environmental mitigation in excess of $133 million. In May 2007, the Resources Agency published the Salton Sea Ecosystem Restoration Program Preferred Alternative Report and Funding Plan. The plan considered 9 separate alternatives for restoration and identified a preferred alternative. Later, in August 2013, the Department of Water Resources, Department of Fish and Wildlife, the U.S. Geological Survey, and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation issued an interagency monitoring and assessment plan in support of ecological restoration at the Salton Sea. The plan is a flexible program-level guide that articulates high-level goals to inform project-level efforts. The plan will allow assessment of existing ecosystem efforts, establish a baseline against which to measure the success of future activities, and assist with the identification of data gaps. Monitoring is critical for informed decision-making and successful restoration efforts at the Salton Sea. Further support for a coordinated restoration approach to the Salton Sea is found in the California Water Action Plan, issued in January 2014, that calls for the protection and restoration of key ecosystems in the state, including the Salton Sea, provides that the Natural Resources Agency will partner with the Salton Sea Authority to coordinate restoration efforts, calls for the immediate implementation of certain ecosystem restoration projects, and notes that the Natural Resources Agency and the Salton Sea Authority are developing plans for other restoration and economic development opportunities. In November 2014, IID filed a petition to modify the 2002 order that requests that the State Water Board order the parties to the QSA and Salton Sea Authority to meet and confer to achieve a feasible restoration plan for the Salton Sea, and requests the State Water Board to modify the 2002 order to add restoration of the sea as a condition of the approval of the transfer. Governor Edmund G. Brown Jr. established the Salton Sea Task Force in May 2015. The task force includes experts from the California Natural Resources Agency and Environmental Protection Agency, including representatives from the State Water Board. The task force has sought input from tribal leaders, federal agencies, local water districts, local leaders, and other public and private stakeholders with an interest in the Salton Sea. The task force relied on information gathered during these meetings to produce its recommendations, which were released in October 2015, and included a description of the principles necessary for a successful Salton Sea management program. In addition, Governor Brown appointed Secretary Wilcox as Assistant Secretary for Salton Sea Policy at the Natural Resources Agency to oversee habitat restoration efforts along the shoreline of the Salton Sea. In March 2017, the Resources Agency released the draft Phase 1 plan for the Salton Sea Management Program. The plan describes actions related to habitat and dust suppression projects to address the receding Salton Sea shoreline and subsequent lake bed exposure. As a part of the task force, the State Water Board regularly monitors and assesses the progress on the implementation of the Salton Sea Management Program, and periodically holds public workshops as part of this function. The first of such workshops was held in March 2015. The board held 4 more workshops in 2016 and 1 in 2017. At these workshops, the board has received updates from the Natural Resources Agency on their efforts on the Salton Sea Management Program. The workshops have included presentations on a variety of issues relevant to the sea, including from parties with experience with similar situations, such as control efforts at Owens Lake. The board has also heard presentations and received oral and written comments by numerous members of the public with concerns, ideas, or other information to share about the situation at the sea. At this point, Lily Weaver will continue with the staff presentation.
In March of this year, IAD filed a motion for an evidentiary hearing before the State Water Board regarding potential modification to Order WRO 2002-0013. Multiple parties involved in the Salton Sea issue, which I'll go through on the next slide, came together and agreed on a draft stipulated order providing for consideration by the board. The draft stipulated order was released in August of this year. The board held a public workshop to receive comments regarding the draft stipulated order in September. A revised draft was released in October and is included as Exhibit A of the draft order that's before the board today. The supporting parties to the draft stipulated order are the California Natural Resources Agency, Imperial Irrigation District, San Diego County Water Authority, Imperial County, Audubon, California, Defenders of Wildlife, Sierra Club California, and the Pacific Institute. The purpose of the draft order before the board is to amend the 2002 transfer order by acknowledging certain aspects of the Phase 1 plan as conditions of the transfer. These include adding annual restoration milestones from the Phase 1 plan, recording agreement among the parties that half of the area restored will be for the purpose of providing habitat for wildlife. The Natural Resources Agency will develop a long-term plan for the Salton Sea restoration by the end of 2022, and the State Water Board will hold annual workshops as part of its continuing oversight role for this process. The order also includes a reservation of authority for the board. Okay, so regarding the California Environmental Quality Act for the proposed order, CNRA is the lead agency for the restoration actions described in the Salton Sea Management Plan and referred to in the proposed order that's before the board. The proposed order itself is not a project subject to CEQA. It can be seen with certainty that the activities being contemplated today will not have a significant effect on the environment. To the extent that the proposed order is subject to CEQA, the proposed order is categorically exempt under the Class 4 exemption for minor alterations to land, the Class 6 exemption for information collection, the Class 7 exemption for actions by regulatory agencies for protection of natural resources, and the Class 8 categorical exemption for actions by regulatory agencies for protection of the environment. If the State Water Board adopts the proposed order today, it will issue a notice of exemption. In terms of changes to the order and the agreement among the parties since the September workshop, did we skip this one? This one. Okay. No, we did not. We're good. My mistake. So, as I mentioned, the board held a workshop in September. We received 29 written comments and oral comments from an additional 23 speakers. Many parties voiced concerns with the situation facing the Salton Sea and expressed their belief in the need for action. The October stipulated order builds on the August version with changes focused on addressing the comments. So specifically, the due dates have been changed from January 1 to December 31 for clarity. It's clarified that the habitat benefits that have been agreed to will not include dust control projects that involve surface roughening, vegetation enhancement, or surface stabilization. It clarifies that the requirement that the long-term plan be completed by December 31, 2020. The previous order had specified that if there's a deficiency of 20% or more, meeting the goals identified in the Salton Sea Management Program, CNRA will be required to submit a plan to get back on track as part of its annual report. The amendment to the draft order would change that to if they're behind on by more than 20% in any given year. So if there's an issue, we would step in sooner to identify corrective actions. The changes also added language stating that the order is non-precedential and clarified that the new conditions being added to the 2002 order are independent and for the sole purposes of Salton Sea restoration. Staff have also received comments on the
Actually,
updated-
I'm sorry, before you move off that point, could you repeat that phrase about independent conditions?
So under the new agreement that was reached in response to the September 7th workshop, there's some additional clarifying language that when we amend, if you vote to amend the 2002 order, you would be adding terms that implement the agreement among the parties, and there would be language clarifying that those are independent conditions from the other language in the order that relates primarily to administration of the transfer.
Thank you.
So this is about the future, not the past.
Got it.
And I may have misheard you, but I think, or the long-term plan completion date is 2022.
December 31st, that's right.
And I think I might have heard 2020, but it's 2022.
2022.
Okay, thank you.
So for future stages of the SSMP. Staff have reviewed the further public comments that came in today. In general, the parties that negotiated the stipulated agreement continue to support it. We saw a support letter from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, from the Salton Sea Authority, the Upper Colorado River Commission, Arizona Department of Water Resources, and the Colorado River Commission of Nevada. The Coachella Valley Water District submitted a policy statement recognizing some of the changes to the draft order, so the language about it being non-precedential, and we did receive comments in opposition from Citizens United for Resources and the Environment, and a number of members of the general public living primarily around the Salton Sea, and from the Imperial County Farm Bureau. Staff recommend that the board adopt the proposed order circulated for public comment on October 26, 2017. And this concludes our presentation. We're available to answer questions from board members.
Any questions? No questions? No?
Actually-
Oh, go ahead.
Seeing none.
One
We have
to
one.
start with.
I'm Bruce Wilcox
Oh,
with the
maybe
Natural
Bruce,
Resource Agency.
actually, go ahead, Bruce. Maybe you'll address that in your presentation.
Okay. Oh, I'm just, sorry for the confusion. I'm just here on behalf of the Natural Resource Agency to say we worked with all of the people that are involved in developing this. We think that it is a good path forward at the Salton Sea. We heartily support it. We also support the CEQA analysis decisions, and we have looked very closely at the various resources at the sea to make sure there were no additional significant impacts.
All right, is that it for your comments? And board members?
I wanted to ask Mr. Wilcox, if you could clarify a little bit, what is meant by a smaller but sustainable Salton Sea?
I think it's a recognition that, at least right now, based on the transfer and based on reduction in water flow from Mexico, there will be less inflow into the Salton Sea than there was. And one of the ways that we're going to treat that, for now at least, is to address habitat around the edges of the Salton Sea. So we're going to end up building habitat for, and then doing dust control around those areas. But in the end, if you use that approach with less water, you have a smaller but sustainable Salton Sea. But it's important to remember that the sea will always receive a certain amount of inflow water. So there isn't, it's not going to dry up like Owens Lake, for instance. And I think it's probably about, the hydrology models vary a little bit, but it's about a third of the lake that will be dry.
Board members, any other questions? Bruce? I thought I might ask the question. We were just talking about the date of the long-term plan, shooting for 5 years from now, roughly. Why do we need to wait so long to develop the long-term plan for the Salton Sea? It seems that, I mean, we've had 6 or 7 workshops, and we really talked, and it's been productive. You know, there's been some good insight on how we're going to roll out the infrastructure to really protect public health and the environment. Why do you think it's going to take another 5 years to complete the long-term plan?
Well, I hope it doesn't take another 5 years. We're hedging our bets a little bit, I suspect. One of the things that was the agreed upon date. One of the things we're concentrating on right now that's very important to Salton Sea is getting projects on the ground. So most all of the folks that, including the new person at DFW that just started yesterday, are concentrating on getting those projects ready to build. And I think we will evolve that into a longer term plan. As an example of that, there is going to be a request for information on water transfer projects that will probably come out by the end of this month or early December, if not the end of this month. So I would anticipate much more progress on that. But the other piece of that is we want to be able to involve the general public. So we've lengthened the time frame so we can get more input from the general public.
I appreciate that, and also we're going to learn a lot as we roll this out, and you want to make sure your long-term plan reflects achievable milestones and outcomes.
Yes.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear it isn't rigid, that it's going to be a full 5 years till we really look at long-term work. Any other comments or
I guess one more add-on. One of the commenters, or at least I can't remember which one of the comment letters that I read mentioned that as written, the stipulated order doesn't really have any significant consequences if the schedule is not met. What would be your response to that?
Well, we're required to put together a correction plan if we don't get within 20% of it. I guess my response would be there isn't. I don't think there's a lot of value in providing significant consequences. We know what we need to do at the Salton Sea. We're going to do that. If it doesn't work for some reason, like you said, we learned something new, we'll have to revise the plan. But that was the biggest reason for not putting any more consequences in the plan. In the stipulated order, I'm sorry, not the plan.
From a staff perspective on this issue, I would say that the draft order as written gives us flexibility to address the wide range of challenges that could come up. We may be in a situation where because of a permitting delay, there's a deficiency, but by the time we're having the workshop, that's already resolved and we're catching up again. Conversely, if there are more serious issues, then the board retains jurisdiction, retains all of its broad authority over water rights and water quality questions. So through our oversight role, we will be able to fine-tune a response to whatever may be needed if there are challenges in the future.
And one more question for Mr. Wilcox. Where might I find your analysis of resources impacts?
We'll have that on the webpage in the next week or so. And it follows it follows the outline of the CEQA document and looks at each resource individually to see if there's any other significant impacts. One of the things that we wanted to do was not put that out. We wanted to wait for the results of this hearing to see, because obviously if this hearing doesn't approve the stipulated order, we've got some differences and some changes we want to make in that evaluation.
So, we as a board are being asked to then maintain an oversight role in the C as the years progress, and I'll share that I have significant concern that we don't have the right monitoring and assessment in place now for us to really be able to perform that oversight ability. So I don't know if you could speak to what is the current capacity right now when it comes to our sort of monitoring of water quality impacts, air impacts, et cetera, and is there then the space and perhaps the need to have a more coordinated sort of agreement with the Air Board and the other agencies where we have a real robust sort of scientific program in place that is collecting data and accurately assessing what the conditions are at the sea as we move into the next years.
The comment on the specific project is to develop that assessment process or that monitoring process. Now, we started doing some monitoring in response to the questions that were brought up about, 6 months ago, maybe a little bit more than that, about wildlife habitat, particularly fish habitat at the sea. That information will be released most likely with the CEQA document. It is not good news, but not as bad as news as some people thought it was. So I tend to agree with you. Without having, normally you would spend a lot more time up front testing these things. We don't have time to test them now. We've got to build them. So we'll build them and test them at the same time.
Well, then I would just direct perhaps our staff then to further work with you and make sure that at least we're augmenting whatever resources you have or helping contribute to, again, what should be a far more robust scientific process and monitoring regime.
Thank you, Board Member Esquivel. Good points, and it relates to some lingering questions I have about that many of the stakeholders have also about the funding question. And so I've maybe two parts. First, building on Board Member Esquivel's point, where do you see the funding coming from for the necessary scientific monitoring and assessment? And then the second part of the question is, do you think the stipulated order as drafted strengthens the resource agency's ability to obtain funding to not only do the projects, but also the monitoring and assessment needed?
I'll answer the second part first. I think it absolutely strengthens that. It gives us that roadmap or that pathway that we can point to. We have an MOU signed between Natural Resource Agency and DOI, and we're working with DOI on how to fund that now. There were some administrative changes that have slowed that funding down, quite frankly, but we're still working on that. Prop 1 would allow a certain amount of monitoring, and so would SB 5, I assume, allow a certain amount of monitoring, not operation and maintenance, but monitoring. So I think those are where we start, and now that we've got, let's say that in the next 2 or 3 months we have an actual monitoring plan put together, we can put that out in front of people and say, here's what we need to do and here's what we need to have funded.
Yeah, this is obviously, something that in other permitting programs, we have a certain amount of authority to compel the monitoring, and we work collaboratively to suss that out. This is a different type of action that we're contemplating today, so.
It is, but I think we've got the regional board, we've got the state water board, we've got several federal agencies that are more than anxious to help us with the monitoring. We've got a science committee that has met now 3 times that will look at the science of the projects before we build them and then help us develop monitoring techniques.
I appreciate that discussion. Any other comments, questions from board members? Okay, well, I think I have about 10 odd speakers. There might be a couple more speaker cards. But with no further questions, I do want to invite folks to come up and speak. We'll set for 3 minutes at this point. If you need a little extra time, we'll let that go. But we want to start out with elected officials, as we like to do in all of our public hearings. And so I want to invite County Supervisor Michael Kelly from Imperial County. And thank you for traveling here and joining us for this hearing today.
Getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be here makes it a long day. So it'll be a long day. But first of all, let me congratulate the board in recognizing all the hard work that all agencies have done to bring this to you for a decision today. And I commend the hard work of the Imperial Irrigation District, County of Imperial, state agencies, your board, to finally recognize the dangers of the receding Salton Sea, what needs to be done for our community. And I think it is a first step for the total and absolute restoration of the Salton Sea, because this issue will continue to go on, and it will continue to be debated, and it will continue to be battled as to what is a long-term solution and resolution to the Salton Sea. And it is a first step. And then again, you mentioned funding. We've got a lot of promises, potential funding down the road, but there's nothing in our hand yet that we can really identify as funding to deal with the issue we have today. But in my estimation, it is a small step for mankind, for lack of better words, and I think it's a result of everybody working together and pushing together. And there's no need to discuss what the problem is with the Salton Sea. I mean, I've been to more meetings than there are seats in this auditorium about the Salton Sea. And we're finally to a point that maybe I can see the door opening. And we have to go forward, we have to seek funding, and we have to resolve that state of California problem, the Salton Sea. Thank you for your time, and thank every agency that has worked so hard together in collaboration to get to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. Very great to hear from you today. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Kevin Kelly from the Imperial Irrigation District. And after Mr. Kelly, Maureen Stapleton from the San Diego County Water Authority. And Jeff Keitlinger from Metropolitan Water District after that. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Thanks to the State Board for staying with us these years. So it was about 3 years ago we first appeared before your board with a petition that called for something much bolder. And one of the critiques I've seen of the stipulated order is that it's too modest. But what I can tell you today, warrant to you, is that nothing in this stipulated order precludes something grander or more robust in the next 10 years. In fact, I think it relies on that. What we've tried to do here, as I've said to your board before, is to not allow the perfect to stand in the way of the good. The problem at the Salton Sea isn't that it's too easy, it's hard. And if it weren't hard, it would have been taken care of at the front end of these water transfers. There's a reason that it wasn't, and that's because it was easier to punt. This stipulated order doesn't allow punting. It's a 10-year roadmap. You were asking about, how do we ensure compliance? It's through your continuing jurisdiction. And I can assure you, IID did not file that petition 3 years ago for any other reason than to ensure the public health of the people of those two valleys, Imperial and Coachella. And I'm certain that future IID boards and future general managers will be just as vigilant as the one I serve today. So I would just close by thanking your board, thanking our partner, Imperial County. There is not a uniformity of opinion in our valley. You simply have to hearken back to the decade-long lawsuit between Imperial County and IID over this very issue at the Salton Sea. The Salton Sea is hydrologically connected to the Colorado River. That's why you're hearing from other states and the Upper Basin. But foremost in our mind is that there needs to be a pathway forward, and we need to all extricate ourselves from this cave that the Salton Sea has become. So thanks to Imperial County, thanks to San Diego County Water Authority, thanks to these non-governmental organizations who are vouching for it as well, and thanks to Governor Brown, who's done more to lead on this issue than either of his predecessors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before you leave, a question. What is your definition of a smaller sustainable Salton Sea?
So I'm really glad you asked. I actually coined that phrase. It wasn't my finest writerly moment, but I think it's very plain in its meaning. The die was cast that the Salton Sea was going to be smaller when the QSA was entered into. And what sustainable means is a lake that won't make people sick. So I think it's an apt phrase. I think it perfectly fits what we confront there. And unlike what your predecessor board faced in 2002, where it was simply 15 years to somehow magically deal with this problem because it was going to be easier. Today, we're confronting it squarely, and we're saying, what do we do on the ground? What the Salton Sea needs is just a measure of success. This plan, this stipulated order provides it.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Can I invite Ms. Stapleton up to speak on behalf of San Diego County Water Authority, and then after her, Mr. Keitlinger, and then Steve Abbott, representing Coachella Valley Water District.
Good afternoon, board members. The Water Authority fully supports the State Board's adoption of the proposed order and the stipulated agreement. The stipulation will not only result in long-term mitigation projects being implemented at the sea, but also will allow for the restoration projects to begin implementation that are through the Salton Sea Management Plan. And we too appreciate everyone who's been involved in this issue, whether it be the water agencies, the environmental organizations, the valley residents and community, the farming community, and other stakeholders. I think the board realizes that we've spent at the Water Authority hundreds of millions of dollars over the past 15 years on the quantification settlement agreement, and that it was important then, it took 8 years to negotiate, it was important then and even more important now, not only for the Southern California region or California, but the 7 states that rely on Colorado River water. And you heard in the presentation earlier by Metropolitan Water District personnel that the Colorado River is facing a long-term drought, and the QSA is critically important for the 7 basin states that it continue. But now I think the agencies that are involved, we're ready to take the next step forward. The conditions at the Salton Sea are not materially different than what was estimated in 2002, and that's because we knew the Salton Sea was a long-term problem. As Mr. Kelly indicated, the sea issue has been around for a very long time, and that we knew it was an issue that needed to be addressed. But from our standpoint, the agencies involved in the quantification settlement agreement, we're ready to move forward in the planned transition to now implement long-term habitat and air quality projects in and around the Salton Sea, where you have lasting benefits of the investments we make. And finally, I do want to applaud the State Board and the administration. You took on a very difficult and an issue that we have all struggled with for a long time. You were very generous in the time you allowed in the number of hearings, informational hearings we've had over the years. I think without your constant attention to this issue, all of us would not be standing here today presenting you with our proposed solution. Thank you.
And we have to give credit to Chair Marcus, who couldn't be here today for personal reasons, and also former Vice Chair Fran Spivey-Weber for that commitment, and not just those of us up here today. All right, next I'd like to invite Mr. Keitlinger, followed by Mr. Abbott, and then Mike Lyons of Audubon, California. Mr. Keitlinger.
Thank you, board members, and welcome to Metropolitan, and glad we were able to accommodate you and provide our facilities at your service. Please give my regards to Chair Marcus, and I assume she's still in mourning over Game 7, as am I. But life goes on. Life goes on. Metropolitan wants to be on the record as fully supportive of the order. We think this is a tremendous step forward. Really concur with the comments of my colleague Kevin Kelly about not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. We have always wanted to find some global perfect solution for the Salton Sea and have put off making substantial progress in the meantime. That's what this 10-year process does. Metropolitan is not directly as engaged in Salton Sea issues as our QSA partners are, but we are very much all involved in the Colorado River. We are in a drought. We do have to take steps to try and put forward a drought contingency plan. We're working with other states. None of these things can come together absent progress on the Salton Sea, and that's what this represents. So very supportive. If you need Metropolitan to call on us, we'll work hard to make sure we can continue to be supportive. We have jurisdictional issues. We put those on the record, but that's not why we're here. We're mainly here to talk about our support for this order in this process. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for attending today and your partnership in this and other efforts around the state. Great. Mr. Abbott, followed by Mr. Lyons, and then Luis Olmedo of the Comité Civic del Valle. Okay.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Moore and members of the board. I'm Steve Abbott of Red Wine and Sherrill, Special Counsel for Coachella Valley Water District, one of the QSA water transfer parties. I refer the board to my written policy statement that I submitted. The draft order and the revised stipulation address the two concerns that Coachella expressed at the September workshop about the prior draft stipulation. The independent conditions of the draft order do not place any conditions on the acquisition of conserved water by Coachella that Coachella uses to alleviate groundwater overdraft in the eastern Coachella Valley. and is consistent with the 2003 QSA legislation that places responsibility for Salton Sea restoration on the state and not on the QSA water parties. Also, the draft order is designated non-precedential, which is consistent with the board's prior practice in this proceeding and with the 2002 protest dismissal agreement among the QSA water parties. CVWD, through the Salton Sea Authority, will continue to work on developing a long-term Salton Sea restoration plan. And I will be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Great, thank you. Mr. Lyons, followed by Mr. Olmedo, followed by Phil Rosenstrader of the Salton Sea Authority.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Lyons. I'm the Director of Public Policy for Audubon, California, and I'm here to give comments on behalf of Audubon as well as our partners, Defenders of Wildlife, Sierra Club, and the Pacific Institute. I want to start by saying how much we join the other partners in appreciating the effort that brought us to today to get the stipulated order. We understand there were compromises made on each side, and it was a lot of work over many months. We particularly appreciate the commitment to 29,000 acres for projects to protect public health on the landscape as it's exposed, and the 50% habitat to provide for birds and other wildlife. Without diminishing the benefit of the stipulated order today, we do want to emphasize the urgency and the need to translate the written commitments to projects on the ground. And I think we've heard a little bit of that already today. But we need those projects to protect public health and the quality of life for residents in the area, as well as for birds and other wildlife that depend on the Salton Sea. And I think reference has been made to Bruce's team and the work that they're going to be doing over the next several years. And it's a matter of not only attaining the money, but making sure that there are the resources in the resources agency and the staff and a team there in order to implement quickly, and a commitment from all partners to make sure that those projects and all those permits and everything else go fast in order to meet those goals that are identified in the plan. We also ask that the board continue to use its authority to monitor progress and to ensure that we build momentum for rapid implementation of the projects. It goes without saying the stakes remain high for people, the local economies and quality of life, and birds and wildlife. And there was a question earlier about what are the consequences to resources if progress isn't made, and that is an ongoing concern that we have. But there's no doubt about the consequences that will occur to the local economies and to the people that live in that area and to birds and wildlife. And so really failure and this continued delay is not an option. And we also notice some others have that this is part of a much bigger piece of the puzzle for the Colorado, for water security in Southern California, and these existing water transfers. And those will remain uncertain and vulnerable unless we see real projects on the ground to implement the promise that's being made today. So we support it, we thank everybody for their work, and we look forward to seeing this translated into real action on the ground soon. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments during the workshop. And what do you think about I mean, obviously you support the order, but I saw your comments reflected in the changes in the final order.
Yes, we're satisfied with the final order, and we're ready to move forward.
Okay. And thank you for that input. I thought it was very valuable. You have a question?
And what is your definition of a smaller, sustainable Salton Sea?
Well, so I would add a friendly amendment to some of the to the definition that Kevin Kelly provided. And he mentioned a lot about the protecting the public health, making sure that the smaller sea protects the public health. Obviously, for Audubon and our partners, we're also very concerned for the wildlife benefits that are provided there. And we know that those two things can work complementary to each other. The wildlife habitat that's created also protects public health. So we understand that's the first need, to make sure that people have safe, clean air that they can breathe, but also that the habitat components are part of the solution and also a necessary part of the solution that the state has made commitments to because of how important the Salton Sea is to birds on the Pacific Flyway.
So would you say that all the stipulating parties share a common vision as to what this smaller, sustainable Salton Sea would be?
Well, I wouldn't want to speak for the other parties, but I do think the fact that we've all signed off on this stipulated order expresses that vision for 29,000 acres to get created over the next 10 years and an acceptance of the 50% of habitat. And that way, I think we all are aligned.
Thank you.
Very good. Next, Mr. Olmedo, thank you for joining us. Then Mr. Rosenstrader, and then John Carter Imperial Valley Water.
Good afternoon, board members. I have a few recommendations that I feel would be added value to the order, and I'm going to cite them by number, but this is number 19. It says conditions 20 through 29, independent conditions pertinent to the Salton Sea restoration, and I wanted to recommend that independent be removed, that they be conditions of the Salton Sea restoration. Also on 21, it says, I would like to recommend the inclusion of public health, environmental justice organizations, and the state has acknowledged its role as an essential in advancing the Salton Sea restoration versus just a catalyst. So I would like to remove the word catalyst, and I also like to recommend on number 23, include per Health and Safety Code 40716, 41700, 42300, which are nuisance regulation indirect source, air permit rules, per state air control laws, per California Air Resources Board and local air districts. On number 24, I'd like to recommend the inclusion of the QSA GPA provide annual report made available to the public through meaningful outreach and translated in Spanish, which is a second most prominent language in the Salton Sea region. Include metrics, performance measures, types of projects, cost, and fund balances. On number 25, I would like to add that no less than 100% acreage without equally beneficial dust mitigation project in place or in planning. Number 27, it has been 15 years since the transfer began. I recommend that annual milestones, if they exist, be cumulative and added to the new milestones in the restoration plans. If they don't exist, then they must be measured and accrued in a cumulative manner. And number 28, shall include report on the QSA JPA funds expenditure and balances, which is part of my previous comments. And while the entities involved, among them IID, Metropolitan Water District, Coachella Valley Water District, San Diego Water District, industry, and others are all represented by legal counsel. Vast majority of community remains unaware of the intricacies of the QSA and its lawyers' negotiations and orders. For this reason, I asked the Water Board to assist in the mandating of greater accountability and greater transparency for the general public with information, both English and Spanish. And I can submit these. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olmedo. Those are comments on a stipulated order, which is before us. Really, we have more flexibility within, the resolution adopting it, but you went to the language. Did you have a chance to share those suggestions with, during the comment phase? Because this order was up for comment back in September.
Right, all my comments were based on what I saw that could be added value to the order. And I'll submit them for the.
Okay, well, I think there were thoughtful comments, and maybe some folks can respond to that are queued up to speak. Thank you, Mr. Olmedo. All right, next, Mr. Rosenstrader, followed by Mr. Carter, and then Craig Elmore.
Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the board, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for your leadership in moving this issue of the Salton Sea forward with a set of solutions that we believe will put us on a path to recovery of the Salton Sea. My name is Phil Rosentrader. I serve as General Manager, Executive Director for the Salton Sea Authority, one of the entities that is unique here today in that we are formed for the express purpose of focusing on the Salton Sea as issues and bringing together the local agencies as a joint powers authority to form a consensus on what that recovery plan might look like. Those agencies include the two counties that have land use jurisdiction around the sea, Imperial and Riverside County, as well as the two large Colorado River water importing agencies, Coachella Valley Water District, Imperial Irrigation District, and landowners on the north end, the Torres Martinez tribe. Together, we have taken action at our most recent Salton Sea Authority board meeting unanimously. All of the directors have voted to support this order. We encourage you and implore you to move forward with all haste. It's been a long time. We have many more miles to go, but the journey of 1,000 miles starts with that first step. We believe we have a first step here. At last, a firm step forward. It's a difficult path ahead, but we're committed to making that happen. We have projects and plans that are now in the first stages and a design and permit. We have real funding to move forward and actually constructing these. We're in a different place at the Salton Sea than we've ever been before. This path helps us move forward with surety. We urge your aye vote in support today. And I'd like to add on the topic of sustainability. There are many interests at the Salton Sea. There are many threads. We weave them together. We have a stronger braid, a stronger thread. We don't have individual strands. If we take the air quality issues, the concerns there, the habitat issues with the Pacific Flyway, the human health issues, the economy, and we integrate those, we now have a much stronger fabric with which to move forward and sustain the health and prosperity of the Salton Sea in the future. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much, and my compliments to the authority for the document that you passed, affirming your support for the stipulated order. It was very articulate. Thank you. Next, Mr. Carter, followed by Mr. Elmore, and then Carrie Morrison. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. My name is Craig Elmore. I'm also a member of Imperial Valley Water Users. I'm a third-generation farmer on both sides. My mother and father, both sides of my parentage, go back to over 100 years in the Imperial Valley. We actually farm on several sides of the Salton Sea, so we're very well aware of it. I have three major concerns and one other observation. In your restoration proposals, with half of it being kept for wildlife habitat, mainly for Pacific flyways, the amount of water that is going to take, I'm concerned, may not be available. The end of this year, when the mitigation water from IID stops going into the sea, a large amount of water will not be going through the drains. Plus, the water that's in the drains or coming off our fields, the better we learn practices on conservation or possibly even reusing the tailwater on other ground will make that much less water available, surface water, rainwater available going to the sea. And third, any water that needs to go to the sea, if there's a cost involved, I don't think it should fall on the landowners, the IID, or the farmers to pay for it. Just like there's environmental water going to the Gulf of California, Colorado Delta, and other places, money is used to offset that amount of water. It cannot be put on the landowners and the farmers to have to generate any additional water for the sea restoration. And finally, the last point, we have done some restoration along the sea for dust control, establishing new wildlife, new fauna, which have brought back quail, rabbits, coyotes where the sea used to be now, but it's requiring zero water once we reestablish the fauna. And I think that should be also an issue besides just waterfowl habitat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carter.
Any questions?
Yes.
I know that this is an issue that others have raised as well, this concern that there won't be enough water to actually accomplish, say, what's even within the 10-year plan. So I would want to invite Bruce just to give us some numbers as to how much water we're actually expecting to see down there, if only to demonstrate the significant amount that will still be available, I believe. So.
Well, I can give you some off-the-cuff numbers. I don't have exact numbers. You're right, the amount of water in the drains is going to be reduced significantly, and the water quality in those drains may be reduced too. There may be less water, higher selenium concentrations. The hydrology model shows about 700,000, 750,000 acre feet going into the Salton Sea per year after the transfer is ramped up. Future action at the Salton Sea will definitely be limited by water. We think that there is enough for this 10-year period, and we're in the process now of finalizing new hydrology that looks at things like even more reduction in flow, because the farming community has done a better job in conserving water than anyone thought they could. So there is probably less water from the, in the drains because of that. And Mexico is discharges less and less all the time. So we're looking at that, but we're reasonably confident there is enough for at least a 10-year plan.
I mean, if you were to go to any other watershed within this state, I think, and said you had 700,000 acre feet of water to be able to do good with, I think people would be jumping up and down. But anyway.
One other quick, remember that we are reusing that water. In other words, we're not putting it into a pond and leaving it there. We'll put it in that first series of ponds and cascade it to the second and cascade it to the third. But your concern is well recognized, and we'll try to firm up that hydrology over the course of the next few months so we have a better idea of what we can do exactly.
Okay, can I make one other comment?
Yeah.
Because my family farms so much along the sea, and we have several farms in the Imperial Valley and elsewhere, long before conservation was way, a general practice in farming, my family was always practicing. My father was as a little kid, I was taught we had to be a good steward because our ground was being flooded. We were having to build dikes and take ground out of production. And so long before any of these QSAs or rules were even done, we were doing conservation. And our amount of conservation that we're doing today is far more than what he did 20 years ago. And I think as the Colorado River water flows decrease more, as science says they think it will, there's probably going to have to be another transfer. And, as much as I hate to say it, the valley is, the director points out, 700,000 feet is going to have a target on it. And I think that has to be taken into account also. Thank you.
Thank you, and we appreciate those stories of long-term conservation. It's been a way of life in a lot of our state for a long time. All right.
Well, as you know, that wasn't John Carter. I am. Yeah, I appreciate your indulgence. Craig is, first of all, is the president of Imperial Valley Water. I'm just the lowly director, so I wanted him to go ahead, and he has another meeting he needs to go to fairly shortly. So
no problem.
Thank you so much, honorable board members. As I said, I am John Carter, and I thank you for the opportunity to make a few comments today. As a member of Imperial Valley Water, I was asked, because of my familiarity with the QSA and its negotiations, to attend and make just a few comments. During the QSA negotiations, I was Imperial Irrigation District's chief negotiator. I know the deal that was made back in 2002, 2003. As a key component of that was the state's agreement of two things. One has already been mentioned. The state agreed that it would pay any additional mitigation costs in excess of $133 million, mitigation for the transfer. The second part of the deal was that the state agreed to assume sole responsibility for restoration of the Salton Sea. And that is really the issue you all are addressing here today. As part of that, you've heard that there was USA legislation, and some of it has been identified in the stipulation and in the order. But one that I found was lacking, and it's important for our organization, represents the farming community in Imperial Valley. And that was SB 654 that said the state's going to assume the responsibility for restoration of the sea, that IID, San Diego County Water Authority, and Coachella Valley Water District would pay $30 million into the Salton Sea Restoration Fund. And now I'm quoting, "and no further funding, obligations, or in-kind contributions of any kind for restoration of the Salton Sea shall be required by IID and the other agencies." I find that, whether it be in the stipulation resolution or the order itself, is seriously lacking. And so I would say that I commend the state and I commend all of you for the good work that you're doing on this. And I respectfully request that your order set forth the duty of the state to restore the Salton Sea, and that no further funding or other in-kind contributions be necessary by the water agencies. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments.
I appreciate the comments, Mr. Carter. And if only the state had as good a negotiator back then as IID did, it seems.
Good. Next, Mr. Morrison, followed by Mr. Craig Deutsche for representing himself, and then David Elajim.
Thank you for seeing us today. I'd like to, if possible, request 12 minutes because I represent a group of people that benefit absolutely in no way in the next 10 years with anything going on at the Salton Sea according to the resolutions that we have in front of us.
We can go 5 minutes.
All right. Well, my name is Kerry Morrison. I'm the mayor of the West Shores of Salton Sea, which includes Salton City, Vista Del Mar, Salton Sea Beach, and Desert Shores. There are at least 5,900 people who live in the West Shores and nearly 3,000 homes and businesses. I've been here since 2011. I'm quite familiar with the inactions that have been happening at the Salton Sea. That just went away. I love these.
Or just request that you focus on aspects of the order that you think are, you could use improvement or that you support.
Okay, overall, there's absolutely nothing in the stipulated order or in the 10-year plan for any residents living close to the shore of the Salton Sea. So that would essentially send our towns under. As also the president of the Chamber of Commerce in the West Shores, we've seen close to half our businesses close in the last 10 years. That's of monumental proportions. We've seen quite a few residents begin to get sick. We've seen a number of different other unexpected problems occur. There was a weird bug bloom in the last month, probably caused by the lack of tilapia, and they're just swarming along the shores. There are millions of them. There have been numerous fires. People have set fires to their homes because they need an insurance bailout, because they can't afford to live somewhere that makes them sick. So what I'm saying is there are many different unforeseen circumstances that have not been addressed in any means in the 10-year plan that I agree with most of, and with the stipulated order that I agree with most of. So we're recommending that the state do not make these transfers until there's a plan in place that can actually address the severity of the situation. The 10-year plan does a good job in many different regards. We're happy that it essentially creates an arc for the animals. It keeps a lot of the dust down, but it still gets a lot worse than it is today. And we have some of the worst asthma rates in the country. Supposedly about a quarter of our students at our high schools and elementary school have asthma, and that's just the reported ones. So there's nothing in this plan for the people that live closest to the sea. Does anyone here live within a mile of the sea? There's quite a few people that do, and they're just simply not represented so far. The residents of Desert Shores are making some great strides in getting restoration plans to put some water back into their canals, but there's no underwriting in that in the plan. It's not even recognized. They can be helped along. They're doing some really good things there. We also need to be careful in the general wording. Mitigation is not synonymous for restoration, and that word gets thrown around all the time, and there's a major difference. Mitigation is making a problem not as bad. Restoration, as agreed upon by the state, is actually solving the issues and making somewhere I think we'd want to live. In order to revise the WRO 2003-13, we see that evidentiary hearings are required to outline all of these different things that have changed since then. In the last 15 years, the amount of mitigation water has changed in many unexpected ways. It's saltier than we thought it would. None of our harbors are connected to the water anymore. Those property values are beginning to plummet, and these people are living next to the nastiest water conditions I've ever seen. They don't deserve that, and that wasn't part of the plan. And California promised that they would prevent this from happening, and that hasn't happened. And there's nothing in the next 10 years to stop that from getting worse, nothing at all. That's what we ask for ultimately. And then we're also asking for a 2 to 3 year timeline for a long-term plan. 5 years, I understand that we need to learn a lot, but I also believe that we have learned quite a bit in the last few decades of the hundreds of plans that have been brought forward and set down again. So ultimately, I bring one question to you. I stand for a lot of people that they come to me with questions, and I want to have a good answer for them. They're asking me, should I sell and leave my home for my health? What should I honestly tell them? And this is a question, not a statement, if anyone can answer it.
So I'm hearing, building on Board Member Dodek's questions, you're saying there's no such thing as a smaller C that's sustainable.
We still don't understand what it is, and neither do the people that spoke today completely. We don't know if this is we don't know how big it is exactly. We don't know if you could plan on building your home nearby it. We don't know if it would be toxic to do so. We don't know if anything would live in it. So we need an accurate definition of what exactly a smaller but sustainable C is, if anyone is going to care to purchase homes or keep what they have. And I feel I shouldn't have to leave until someone tells me what to tell our residents. Should they sell their homes for their health concerns? Please, someone answer me.
Other comments?
You're speechless. Does anyone have an answer? I assume all of you in this room would have a good idea. What should I tell our residents? Should they leave the West Shores? Or can we put something in the next 10 years to represent their health, economic prosperity, and stop this residential degradation that we're seeing in so many different ways?
Well, we've certainly heard these issues from you, and we had a lengthy panel from you in September, and some interesting ideas from the local community. And that's what's going to take is the local community deciding
We've
really
decided
having
nothing is
a
being done
big
about them.
influence on the vision of the future. And so, Mr. Wilcox has a process, you know, and we can always improve it in terms of getting public involvement, but we certainly encourage it. And I guess, you know, we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about, you know, what does this action that's proposed today do, and what does it set forth in motion? The hope is it does create something sustainable, something that's more healthy in the long run.
We understand sustainability, but we don't understand nothing for the thousands of residents that live close to the sea. And will anyone answer my question, please? It's your choice. What do I tell them? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Deutsche, followed by Mr. Elajim.
My name is Craig Deutsche. I speak as a private citizen, although I happen to be a member of the Air Advisory Committee for the Salton Sea Task Force. I believe that the proposed order revising WRO 2002-13 is a responsible approach to the problems of the Salton Sea. The management plan phase 1 is workable, and the proposed order sets a reasonable timeline. As has been suggested already, the proposed order does not specifically deal with the case if there is a failure to meet the timeline, although Bruce had suggested that it's difficult to know in advance what the problems will be. I would like to propose a single sentence to be added at the end of condition 28 in the stipulated order to correct the oversight. As written, condition 28 states that if work falls 20% short of the planned target for any year, then within the next 12 months, a plan must be prepared to correct the situation. It asks only for a plan, and the plan does not guarantee results, nor does it mitigate for the delay in time that comes in carrying this out. I propose adding the following sentence at the end of condition 28. If for 2 consecutive years, work has fallen 20% short of the targets outlined in the condition 24, then the Imperial Irrigation District will cease its delivery of water to the Salton San Diego Water Authority and instead direct the water to the Salton Sea until the restoration work is back on schedule. I realize this is a somewhat draconian proposal, but on the other hand, it does represent a plan for a possible eventuality. To have no plan for the possible eventualities is not entirely responsible. Obviously, this creates a difficulty for the San Diego Water Authority. But on the other hand, the San Diego Water Authority is using desalinated water and putting it into the aquifer. The San Diego City does not have a water crisis at the moment, and if the plans at the Salton Sea fail, that will represent a crisis. And indeed, the proposal is that the diversion would occur to buy a year or two of time at the Salton Sea, and hopefully the situation would be corrected. Ideally, of course, we would all hope that everything would proceed according to the schedule that's in the stipulated order, and that the proposal of changing or modifying the agreement for water transfer would never come up. On the other hand, this sentence added to section 28 does add urgency to maintaining the schedule, and it's been agreed that urgency is needed. It remains to be decided how it's to be managed. I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your comments. All right, Mr. Elajim, and he's the final speaker before I would ask for discussion from the board. And perhaps you can address some of the questions that came up earlier.
Vice Chair Moore, I was planning to do so.
Very nice, thank you.
Though I'm not sure I will be able to address Member Dodek's question any better than Mr. Kelly did. But good Good afternoon, Vice Chair Moore. I'm David Elajim, Downey Brand, here on behalf of the Imperial Irrigation District. I can't begin any better this afternoon than by quoting Mr. Kelly, who said, this afternoon, we need to make sure that the perfect is not the enemy of the good. What we've had here, and you may remember in the March 2015 workshop, that Chair Marcus said, look, it's been 15 years, we really need to do something. What you have in front of you this afternoon is really the best, if not the last, effort to try to resolve all of these issues. As Ms. Stapleton said, this is an astonishing effort on behalf of a number of different entities, water agencies, NGOs, the county, coming together for the general good. We've all worked very hard on this, and I think that this is a draft stipulated order that really makes sense not only for all of us, but for the state of California. Now, let me address a couple of questions that have come up in the course of the discussion this afternoon. First of all, there were a number of suggestions about different changes to the order or the resolution. To put it very simply, the stipulating parties would there should be absolutely not a single change to the draft order. It was very carefully negotiated, very carefully worded, and no changes at this point can be accepted. If your board decides to change the order, the whole thing is likely to fall apart. Not a threat, but just a direct statement. There was a commenter who suggested a number of different changes to the resolution. After conferring with IID and San Diego County Water Authority, we have two of those we think would be actually good to incorporate into the order. The first is to include materials in Spanish. Absolutely, we'll do that. The second of all, there was a comment about lack of public understanding about not only the QSA, but also the stipulated order, how it's going to work, how the resources agency is going to reach out, et cetera. IID is willing to hold a series of public meetings to allow the Assistant Secretary Wilcox, others, our staff, to describe what's happening, to take public input, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We think that that's very useful as a way to build public understanding, public consensus for how this whole project can go forward together over the next 10 years. So we would recommend that to your board. Language to be determined, but I think it's pretty straightforward. There have been a number of comments, and I think the theme of many of the comments this afternoon has been enforcement, monitoring. How will we make sure that this happens? That was an issue that was at the centerpiece of the negotiations. And do I do anything here or not? Okay. And
please continue.
Not only was it a centerpiece, but it's something that Chair Marcus has talked about from the very beginning. And we've tried to take that very seriously. What we've come up with, if you look at the ordering paragraphs, is a situation where your board, and you're all charged by the governor under the Salton Sea Action Plan to be the oversight board, to make sure that all of this happens. Your board has plenary authority, of enforcement authority, to make sure that all of the conditions are met. And if it's not acceptable to you, Secretary Wilcox is going to be producing a report every year, and you're going to be reviewing it every March. If it's not acceptable to you, you have full authority, and you know your authorities very well. Your counsel has already described them, to be able to tell all of us, hey, you're not doing the job. You need to get with the program. You need to do this, that, or the other thing. And I think all of the parties are comfortable with your board having that oversight authority. We recognize that you approve the transfers. We recognize that you have continuing jurisdiction over the transfers. We recognize that you have to make this happen. We're all comfortable with it, and that is the answer, I think, to the concerns. It lies within your hands or your successor's hands. Be happy to take any questions you may have.
I actually have a question on that, your last comment, and it's related to, I don't know if it's another speaker spoke to this, but the condition 28, the 2-year period, and just would like to hear your thoughts as to what went into that 2-year period, because the concern that I have is issues that don't get addressed. I don't know that it has to be immediate, but with diligence as soon as possible, so that we don't have things lingering. And so just want to get your comments on that 2-year as opposed to a different time frame.
Let me first address the suggestion that was made that essentially there be a neutron bomb or something of that nature and cutting off the transfer. That's simply not acceptable. In terms of actually how do you make this happen, I believe it was the NGOs who put in some of the language there about how we are going to do enforcement and that there has to be a plan. It was understood at that point in time that the board, again, has the authority, if Secretary Wilcox, for example, is not able to execute his plan, he's presumably going to tell you, here's why. I have had funding problems, we had this problem, we had that problem, whatever it might be. And your board will be able to weigh that and say yes, no, or maybe. Or maybe we modify the plan, maybe we say, no, you need to do this, that, or the other thing first. But again, there's so much authority in your board that I think that will actually not be a problem.
And on that point, I think reading the red line version here, in response to the NGO comment, which was aligned with what you said, Board Member D'Adamo, that the 2 consecutive years has been struck from the proposed stipulated order, and now it's an annual evaluation. Should an annual milestone?
Oh, I'm remembering that now. Yeah, I didn't realize that it actually was in the red line, though. Okay.
But still, there's an annual cycle, and then that's not maybe as real time as some would like.
I'm actually more comfortable with the annual and think, between that and the report and the workshop process that, there's opportunity to kind of keep the fire burning,
Well, the way in which the draft stipulated order is set up is very much to keep the fire burning. And that's why the Resources Agency has got to have an annual report, and that is why your board is going to review this annually to really keep all of our feet to the fire. Because, again, when I go back to the March 2015 workshop, Chair Marcus said, don't ever let us do something and come back 15 years later and have a big problem. We have to stay on this. And the stipulating parties have taken that very much to heart in trying to draft this.
And so you're okay with the red line version at this point, the 1 year?
The red line version as it was proposed by the proposing parties, not with the change suggested just now. Am I being clear about that?
By one of the commenters?
Not by the commenters, by
our staff.
By the sponsoring parties. The staff recommendation here was the sponsoring parties' proposal as of October 26.
So just to be clear, you're proposing no changes to...
No changes.
Exhibit A of the draft order, and there were those 2 other items you mentioned.
Yeah. In fact, Ms. Weaver, as I said before, if there were to be proposed changes to the draft order, I think all the sponsoring parties would simply say, we're done.
Mr. Lodgen, let's clarify that, since I've always known you to be very careful in your wording. What you meant to say is in the stipulated order, which is Exhibit A, because when you say the draft order, that is the draft order that is before us, that staff drafted, which I assume we would be free to change a wording here and there.
Now, Member Dodek, I was imprecise in my language for once. I was referring to the Exhibit A.
Thank you.
So you're comfortable with to reflect the 2 changes that you described. If there do need to be changes to the vehicle that adopts Exhibit A, that's something that you'd be willing to entertain.
Let me try to clarify that. If the board were to approve an order with Exhibit A, with the addition of Spanish language materials and the proviso that IID would hold public meetings to help foster public understanding of the still draft stipulated order and the Salton Sea Management Plan, we would be very okay with that.
I think we might include that in a motion rather than trying to add language to the draft order. Thank you, Mr. Loudon.
Yeah, just to be very clear, this is the resolution that the board is proposing.
It is a draft order that is before
Thank you.
us. There is no resolution.
Any further questions?
No, not here. Any further questions or comments? No, okay. All right.
Okay.
Well, I think we have a choice. You know, we could, I want to get staff's input and council's input. We could amend the hereby ordered portion with a new paragraph. There's 3 paragraphs there. We could add a 4th paragraph with these provisions as an option. Take a recess and draft something for the stakeholders to review in the draft order, not the Exhibit A. So does that sound like something reasonable? I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, and let me just say,
otherwise, we could do a motion to do something, but I almost would rather see the language.
and that is, the motion vehicle is something the board often considers. What makes this a little bit different and why I prefer that it appear in the ordering provisions of the board's order approving, accepting the stipulation, accepting Exhibit A, is because it is going to create expectations beyond what your staff will carry out. But instead, you've heard counsel for Imperial Irrigation District indicate that they and other supporting parties are willing to provide the materials in Spanish, as well as to conduct meetings within the Imperial Valley about the Quantification Settlement Agreement, the stipulated order, as well as the Salton Sea Management Plan. So I think the best path is to take a few minutes. I think the language comes together pretty quickly, and then we can reconvene for the board to consider that, as well as anything else you all may wish staff to consider during a break.
Nothing jumping to mind here. I feel that is responsive to some of the comments we heard, including more engagement of the local affected citizens. I think you're addressing that issue, which we respect and acknowledge. So let's take 15 minutes.
I would say I'd like also perhaps the inclusion then of language regarding better monitoring and assessment in order for us to fulfill our oversight abilities, and whether that's directing staff to develop an MOU or whatnot.
If I might respond to Member Esquivel's question. In terms of the monitoring, we have tried in the draft stipulated order to stay away from that level of detail, because the annual report that the Resources Agency would be putting together would have that level of detail. And so to the extent, if there is a report that does not have a sufficient monitoring information, that would be good feedback from the Water Board to the Resources Agency, and it's provided for in that process.
Joanna Hoff, IID, in-house counsel. I do want to just be clear that there were reasons why we didn't go into more detail, and a large part of that is because there are significant monitoring, air quality monitoring obligations as part of the QSA mitigation, and that is being handled and implemented by IID right now. We're increasing that. That's part of our air quality mitigation program, which could be part of the public meeting that we can provide more information about that. It's a very robust monitoring program that is supported and evaluated by San Diego and Coachella and the state. So we were working to ensure that we were not mixing up things that are already being done or being overlapped. It would be part of the report. It'll be integrated into what the state is doing. We're having that coordination with the air quality mitigation program and the state's management program. But it may be helpful just to have a little bit more robust understanding of that program.
My concern is certainly you have that, it's the obligations of the QSA, the JPA is undertaking, but I still think that there's a need for better coordination amongst just a monitoring sort of regime, if you will. I know that certainly on the legal side, I'm sure there's reasons why you would like to keep it separate and not necessarily have any confusion or mingling, but I would still like to see better direction for a more comprehensive and coordinated effort on that side.
And to Board Member Esquivel's point, the paragraph 28 doesn't say anything about monitoring and assessment. It talks about projects completed, any departures from, the performance measures, upcoming projects, acreage, dust mitigation and habitat, but no monitoring and assessment.
Again, it really comes from, we're being asked here to play an oversight role into these next years, and how am I supposed to feel confident as a regulator to be able to express that? I understand, there'll be a yearly report, and if there's something insufficient, we can bring it up there. But I'd rather get at it at the front end and say, isn't there an exponential benefit to better coordinating what is a very large land area that we're talking about, but also the interactions between then water quality and then air quality as well. I mean, there must be some way to better synthesize just that information that we'll be getting so as to be able to feel more confident again in this oversight role that we're being asked to undertake in all of this.
Board Member Salton, if I'm understanding you correctly, and maybe I'm not, but I'm not being directly involved, but it seems that what you're asking is that that in the first annual report that a coordinated monitoring program be included, and that we can review that as part of the annual report submittals. And that way, we're not adding a new condition into the stipulation, but we're saying that to evaluate the annual report, we need to have a coordinated monitoring system that addresses all the issues. And if we direct at this point, then it's upfront that it would be cool that it would be included in the first monitoring plan.
Yeah, I would propose that we take the opportunity of this break to discuss addressing this issue as well. And it is something that I think that if we have an opportunity to come back and we'll be better situated to respond.
Since we're piling on, Ms. Weaver had responded to a question I asked earlier about ramifications, consequences, remedies should these milestones not be met. And you had said that the order, you believe, has, as drafted, maintain our flexibility to respond. Could you either point me to where that is in our order or add some clarifying language to ensure that is indeed the case?
So the reservation of authority, the microphone should be on. It says it's on. Can you hear me? Okay. So the board reserves continuing authority to work on these issues, and within that means that any power that you have as regulators doesn't go away. It's still there. We can use it as appropriate if needed, and we're here today because we have all been talking to each other through these workshops, through this process. We have learned to work together, and we are trying to lock in our momentum and keep going as partners so that we don't need to answer the question of or else. If the current language reserving the board's authority.
I'm sorry, where is that language?
So it should be, where is it in the draft order?
End of Exhibit A.
So it's term 29, so that would be added to the 2002 order. The board reserves jurisdiction to further amend conditions 19 through 28 of this order as necessary to ensure Salton Sea restoration throughout the term of the QSA through its continuing jurisdiction under this order.
And obviously we have jurisdiction to amend all conditions of the order, not just conditions 19 through 28.
And just for clarification, that exists in the existing transfer order, and I think that the part of the language you're seeing here is to recognize that these are independent conditions. The provision that's cited earlier, I believe it's number 20 or 21, and so it needs its own separate continuing authority clause. At least that's how I read it. The supporting parties may have a different view.
I think just for my own level of comfort, if we might include, and yes, it is probably restating something that is in the original order, if we could include language in the draft order that is currently before us right now. Not your stipulated order, but our draft order.
So, to be clear, the request is to have language in the draft order adopting Exhibit A in addition to the language in Exhibit A that reserves our authority. Exhibit A being the stipulation that the parties negotiated.
As I understand it, Exhibit A, term 29, only mentions reserving jurisdiction with respect to amending conditions 19 through 28. Implied there is that, obviously, we maintain jurisdiction to amend other sections of the order.
I certainly understand your concern. So,
Again, I think that we would benefit from having the opportunity to break and return to you with a response.
Good, and thank you for weighing that additional consideration. And given the expanding volume of matters that you're going to consider, instead of 15 minutes, I was going to suggest a half hour.
No.
I think that would be helpful.
That's what you get. No, I'm just kidding. So that way, yes, you can take our time and work through these issues. But if you come back sooner, Board Member Dodek will.
We will, and we will do our best efforts to come back sooner.
I'm out of here.
Okay. All right. Try to be back here at 5 till. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay. 5 till 3, please. Thank you.